Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Lendy's monthly financial property update. This month is December. We have officially almost made it out of 2020, and I can't say I'm too upset to see the back of this year and really excited to see what 2021 is going to bring for all of us. This month, I'm really, really excited to bring a very special guest back. We first met her way back when the pandemic really took hold, and she gave us some incredible insights around how to buy a home in the property market when you're in lockdown. So I'm really, really thrilled to welcome back Alice Stolz. She's the National Managing Editor over at the Domain Group, and she's here today to really talk about property highs and lows, but more importantly, to give us an insight into what 2021 might bring for all of us.
Thank you, Zara, and great to be here. And how things have changed since when we last spoke. I keep thinking back in March or April, I think we spoke, and we were just in such a different climate and environment. And I think we probably all, the sentiment felt very different for nearly all Australians.
Absolutely. And I think I'm personally just super proud of what Australia has managed to achieve. If you look around the world today, it's still very difficult in lots of places, but here we are, end of the year, and looking forward to what could be a really exciting property market in 2021. And that's exactly why we've got you on today. So welcome back, Alice, and thank you so much for joining us. Why don't we kick off with a little bit of your thoughts on the future of property in 21? What are you seeing? You guys at the Domain Group obviously see a significant piece of the market. So maybe you could do a little recap of 2020 for us, but more importantly, what are you looking at for 2021? What should we be looking out for?
So I think what's been really just utterly fascinating is if we look at what's happened in 2020, there are lots of doomsdays at the time when COVID hit and the pandemic was spreading. The Australian market could potentially drop by 30%. And now, as you say, here we are in December, and we definitely have not seen drops to that level or even a glimmer of that. And a lot of that has been Australia's response to the pandemic. But you still look at what's happened in Victoria. They've experienced an extreme lockdown period, and the market there has still held steady even throughout that. So I think on a positive side, the market has held up so incredibly well and completely defied the expectations of what most commentators were saying would happen. And what we are seeing, though, is a lot of stock come onto the market and so much demand to buy it because we've got this swirling effect of record low interest rates. So it's this sort of perfect storm, sort of the wrong word, because it's not really a storm. It's like this sort of perfect mix of everything happening at the right time now, because people are sort of wanting change, because you've got this sort of social change going on that people are actually thinking, gosh, should I go and live in the country now? I can do my job from anywhere I want to live. And that's then fueled with interest rates being so low, and it's fueled with, I think, this sort of sense of the pandemic has left people thinking life is short. I don't want to wait till I retire to go and live by the beach or to make that move. I think people are really beginning to see the possibilities and really indulge that. So I think it's going to be a really interesting summer, in that I think people will do a lot of sort of spending time on a beach, I hope, really thinking about what they want to do with their life going forward when it comes to property. And I think that's going to put us in an environment in 2021 where people will actually probably pull the trigger on some things they might have been mulling over for quite some time. So I think, in summary, I think 2020 did not sort of cave in like people expected it to. And I think people are going into 2021 very optimistic. We've also got this incredible situation where the government's got a lot of incentives out in market at the moment, and we're seeing a big spike in first-time buyers. So there's lots of interesting factors at play. And the other sort of big piece, the elephant in the room, I suppose, is that we have no immigration coming into the country at the moment. So until that situation changes, there is a sort of there's a certain stillness to the market in that respect, because migration is so important when it comes to property. So a lot of Australians, I think, are going to change the way they live in the next 12 months. And I think it's going to be a really interesting time for the market.
That's such an interesting point about immigration. And I think, do you feel like a stiller market is a more positive market for some of those first home buyers, potentially even first time investors? Or do you think it's going to have a negative impact on pricing?
Look, I think we're expecting to see prices go up next year at the moment. So I think this idea that prices are going to fall and crash has sort of now become a bit a bit off. And I don't think many people are going around saying that, and certainly not what we're seeing through the data that we're seeing, particularly for the housing market. How that affects investors, it's going to be an interesting time for investors. So first home buyers have really got a lot of pent up demand at the moment. And I think there's a feeling that the market's going to keep rising. They've got to get in now. And we're hearing situations where parents who are now giving their kids, those who can, that idea of the bank and mum and dad, giving their children extra money for a deposit so they can actually make that leap into the market now rather than wait and see prices increase. So I definitely think that's happening. And then there's all this sort of chatter around stamp duty reform, which we can talk a little bit about a bit more detail in a minute. But it's interesting, this idea that people are sort of saying, do I go, do I wait? What do I do now? The other thing is obviously the home builder incentives the government's put on the table as well. So people are now also saying, maybe I will now renovate a property. So I just think there's all these sort of things that make buying for Australians a very attractive proposition at the moment.
It's an exciting way to leave this year and look into next year. Certainly wasn't what we were talking about when we first caught up in April. But you did just mention there stamp duty, and that is something I do really, really want to pick your brains around. So we've seen some sort of increased efforts, as you say, from some of the state governments to try and make housing options a little bit more accessible, particularly those first home buyers. Could you talk us through maybe what some of those stamp duty discussions and other incentives are, and kind of what your thoughts are on them?
Sure. So I'll focus on New South Wales and Victoria. So basically, we've got two different scenarios here. In New South Wales, the government's announced they're going to begin a public consultation process on property tax reform. So basically, the model would give people the option to potentially act stamp duty and then commit to an annual property charge each year. Now, the proposed model includes a property tax rate that would allow for lower owner occupiers with higher rates for investors and commercial properties. So that's going to be that. What they're looking at is going to be a permanent reform to that in that state of New South Wales. In Victoria, the government has committed to basically slashing stamp duty by 50% for new builds for the next 12 months. So it's a temporary sort of tax break that they're offering in Victoria. However, I would say that's probably more around the fact that the government in Victoria doesn't have the capacity at the moment to sort of commit to anything more permanent, given what they've been through with the second wave of COVID there. But there is expectation that they may look at doing stamp duty reform in the future.
Interesting. I think that stamp duty is something that we often see, certainly our first home buyers forget as they first start that process. So it's really nice to see that the government's having a think, or the state governments are having a think about different ways to look at it.
And Zara, it really, if you're a first home buyer particularly, it really it gets baked into that price that you're paying out when you buy that property. So I think that it means that people will be able to sort of put more money towards their investment should they need to. And that is what can happen. It may end up pushing up prices to some extent because people have got extra cash, so to speak, to put into the price and put their hand up at auction that little bit higher than what they may want once they've done.
Absolutely. I think that coupled with is insanely low interest rates, particularly for some of the fixed rates products that we're seeing out there, rates as low as the 1.98s with one of the big four. It starts to put some of those properties that maybe were slightly out of reach because of stamp duty back in reach for certain customers. It's a great time to just reassess where you are and what you can afford, I think.
I think you're right, Zara. And I think the other thing that these incentives and even these conversations around government incentives and reform do is put confidence in the market. And I think it puts confidence in the hands of the consumers to make them think, maybe now is the time, should I investigate? Whereas I think when interest rates were obviously much higher, it just is another sort of roadblock, why not to transact, basically. Whereas now you can really feel it as a clear path ahead of people. And that's what's obviously getting people really, we're seeing clearance rates that are often in some areas higher than what they were this time last year, which is quite an exceptional situation. And again, not what anyone expected to actually happen. But I think you've got so many incentives from the government, and very deliberately. We know how important housing is to help prop up the economy of Australia, basically.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. That's been super helpful. If you could leave our viewers with sort of a little bit of your 2 cents worth for 21, maybe even a little bit of advice, what do you think you would leave them with, or what would you leave them with?
From my perspective, I think Australians now have the chance to really see the possibilities of what is ahead in their future. I know a lot of people are just really reveling in this working from home scenario, and we've seen a lot of corporates and private businesses commit to saying that staff can have a more hybrid approach to how they live and work going forward. So what we're seeing is people having really flourishing with the idea of moving to, this idea of commutable acreage, which is sort of suburbs or little towns, sort of half an hour, 45 minutes away from metro cities, where housing is a lot cheaper. They can actually have land or be by a river or the sea or something, and actually have the life that they thought they'd have to wait 20 or 30 years for. So I feel really encouraged that we're so lucky in Australia, as you touched on earlier, not only to the response to COVID, but to have a country where we have so many options and opportunities available to us now. So I think what we're going to see is a lot of people sort of being plucky enough to think, to really hone in on their dream and work out what they want to do. And I feel really inspired that we're in a country that, people can do that basically. I definitely think we'll see increased interest in the regional areas of Australia. And as the borders are finally going down around us now in all of Australia, I think we're going to see a lot of people travelling interstate, buying potentially buying interstate. We saw even during the pandemic when Queensland was closed off to the rest of the country, people were still buying properties from New South Wales and Victoria in Queensland, sight unseen. That's incredible that people just doing sort of virtual inspections, buying, quite substantial properties without having even seen them because they know the state, they know the safety of the state that they're in. And I think that while we can't travel beyond our shores, that people are really going to enjoy that aspect of moving around our country more, which I think is a wonderful thing for Australia.
It absolutely is. Alice Stolz, thank you so much. Again, you were incredibly helpful when we met you way back in April, and we were doing virtual auctions and virtual open houses. And to sit down and chat with you as we close out the year with a booming property market, everything back to normal, somewhat still, with safety and with precautions, but somewhat back to normal is really, really exciting. I, for one, am looking forward to a bit of a sea change myself as the new year approaches. So I'm one of those migrants that will be reassessing what life looks like.
What are you doing? What are you doing, Zara?
Head back to Queensland actually, and see if I can continue my role and as it is, but in this virtual world, I don't technically need to be in this state. I can be closer to family. So we're going to see how it goes. It's all a big experiment, but this whole year I think has been the big experiment. But we're coming out of it better people, I think, and I'm really excited for that. But thank you so much once again. It's just so great to have you on. We look forward to having you on again. For all of you guys out there, if you are thinking about a change or you haven't yet looked at your current mortgage, given the current interest rates and where they are, please don't hesitate to jump on lendy.com.au. We're here to help. We're happy to just do a quick assessment. Or if you just need a little bit of guidance on things like stamp duty in other states, then please head to our YouTube channel. We have how-to videos on every single state and every single stamp duty that you need to be thinking about. So it's all there, it's free. Thank you to all of you as well, those of you who tune in and have watched us through this year. Thanks for coming along the journey. We'll be back in January, looking forward to 2021. But thank you and have a great Christmas, have a great new year, and we'll see you next year.